But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. Let me tell you about my great God. Hey guys, Pastor Tim here. Hope you're ready to get your day started off in God's Word. We are on Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 20, we had the 10 Commandments given. This chapter, it refers to it as judgments that are given, and it's just civil laws to help govern how man deals, or Israel deals with their fellow man. Don't know why I couldn't get that out of my mouth. In the first 11 verses, we see certain laws and judgments that deal with how the Israelites were to deal with their Hebrew servants, all right, their brethren that are serving them, okay? And then the second half of the chapter deals with personal injury, loss, and so forth that happens amongst, whether it's a man against a man or an animal against a man, or, you know, loss of property, whatever it is, it deals with just personal injury and loss. So this chapter can get kind of, I don't want to say confusing or anything like that, but it just deals with a lot of different things, and it goes by it kind of quick. So I do encourage you guys, as you go through this chapter, if you have any questions, by all means, if you go to Lighthouse Baptist Church, you can ask me, you can ask Pastor Kern or whoever, or if you're watching this and you go to a different church, of course, ask your pastor to get a little more insight on these questions, or you can refer to other commentaries and stuff as well. Just know I won't be able to get into the nuances of every little thing that happens in this chapter. But in dealing with the first half, let's just hit that first. The first 11 verses that deal with the Hebrew servants, or slaves, if you want to put it that way. One thing I want you to understand right off the bat, all right, because this can be kind of an interesting subject, like, wait a minute, you know, is the Bible saying that, you know, like slavery is okay? One thing you have to understand right off the bat is that the servitude that we see happening in the Bible, especially in Israel, all right, in the Old Testament, is nothing like the slavery we see in our own country's history back in the 1800s. In fact, we see many of the laws that are set up in this chapter, all right, and in like the book of Leviticus and so forth, are set up to ensure that the servants were treated properly, that they had their rights, that they weren't simply treated as an object and abused as a tool. All right, that's something I want to get off clear right off the bat when dealing with these verses here. The Hebrew slave oftentimes is someone that willingly sold themselves into servitude to pay off a debt. And we see in this beginning part of this chapter specifically that we see that the term, you know, for 6 years. So often they were only to serve the person that they're indebted to, or whoever they sold themselves into servitude with. We see that they're only to serve for 6 years, and on the 7th year they are to be let free. Now we do see in these verses there is the exception of saying, you know, the guy's like, you know what, I'm on, you know, my master, he's good unto me, he pays me a good wage, he provides for me. I think it's better for me to stay with my master than to go out and try it on my own. I might go right back into debt again. He has then the right to choose whether or not he wants to stay as a servant unto his master or to go free. And in the book of Leviticus and so forth, you see that those that choose to go free, their master gives them money and other things to help set them up to be successful in their free life as well. So very different from what we see in our own country's history. All right. We see later in this chapter, when it deals with personal injury or loss, we see that man stealing is forbidden. Anyone that steals a man to sell him and so forth is to be put to death. All right. This very much goes against the practice that we see in early British and American history, where they were stealing people from Africa to sell them as slaves. That is forbidden in the Bible. So once again, just distancing itself from what we see in our own country's history. When we go into the second part of this chapter that deals with the personal loss and injury, you know, a man striking a man and injuring someone, or injuring their livestock and so forth, we see certain things that deal with the servant as well. Now, some people may take these things and say, well, the Bible is giving allowance for you to abuse a servant or to harm a man or a woman up to a certain extent without being punished, and that is ridiculous. What we see in the overarching context of this chapter and in the context of God's word is that physical abuse is very much frowned upon, and these laws are set up and these judgments are set up to discourage any sort of physical abuse, whether that be to a servant, your fellow man or a woman, or whoever it be, even someone else's property, such as livestock. Physical abuse and violence is being rejected and forbidden with these laws. It's not giving allowance for a certain extent. It's saying, hey, no, if this happens, you will suffer loss for it. All right. If you were to harm your servant or your slave, you will lose the right to have that servant or that slave. He will go free. All right. If you do harm to someone's cow by accident, or if you do some or harm by determination, like you wanted to hurt their livestock, you will suffer loss for that as well. There's a lot of stuff in this chapter. All right. I just hope I can definitely clear up maybe what would be a very, I don't want to say controversial, but maybe a confusing subject for you at the beginning there when it comes to the servant. Very much different from in America's history. They had their rights. They could actually even, in some cases, own property and so forth. And they were set free after 6 years, and they were not treated simply as an object. And in fact, it was most often a voluntary thing on their part to help pay off a debt that they owe. Very much different from what we see in our own country's history. And when it comes to the second half of the chapter with the personal loss or injury, you see a lot of, like, that's where we get a lot of stuff like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The picture there is just that, if you are to, one, we see the sanctity of life. If a man was to strike another man to kill him, he should be put to death. That's where we kind of get the idea for a capital punishment and so forth, a life for a life. But just understand, God is showing forth there the sanctity of life, the value and the precious nature of it. All right, it's not something to be degraded. It's not to be something to be forsaken. It's valuable, and therefore any harm that is done unto a person's life will receive equal punishment. All right, and you can get into the nuances of that as well. Like I said earlier, if you have any questions about this, if you go to Lighthouse Baptist Church, of course, come up to me. You can ask me anything, or Pastor Kern as well. If you go to a different church, I encourage you to talk to your own pastor as well, or refer to good study tools or commentaries just to get a better picture. All right, because a lot of these things will be better understood in the context of the first 5 books of the Bible and the context of the whole entire Bible as well. All right, but other than that, I hope you guys are writing things down. Tell somebody what you got out of God's word today. Stay safe, stay healthy. God bless.